Harry, how you doing? Good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, nice to see you too, Nick. I'm doing okay, although what I would say is it was I had an interesting morning. I've had an interesting week, if I'll be honest. And the reason it was interesting is because it wasn't interesting. I had a lot of time off this last week, and I kind of wanted to go away, and I'm in an R-ing about where to go and what to do. And in the end, long story short, I didn't do anything. But there was this event. I couldn't actually make it because I'm working tomorrow and it goes on till tomorrow. And I've always wanted to go to Colombia. And there's this event in Colombia at the moment that's happening, which is one of those Mind Valley type events that I've been to in the past. This one is a 4-day event, not a 3-week event. Anyway, I've kind of made my peace with the fact I wasn't going, because it is quite pricey as well when you consider all the costs involved.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I decided I'm not going to go, and I've been quite good on social media for a number of years, in that I don't tend to look at social media very much. I have, like I've said before, I think blockers in place and everything, so I don't actually get anything. This morning I decided to go on. I go onto Facebook and I just check my notifications just to see if anyone's tagged me, and I released one of our podcasts as a video or the other day, and then I just saw and then I just saw like a little notification, and it said like someone who I don't know has posted in a group that I'm in the group with, and this particular group called A Fest. And so I thought I'll click on that video, and I clicked on the video, and they were like, there's a video of party by the beach as it's supposed to be, or pool party or something. And I started watching the video thinking, I probably shouldn't watch this video because I'm just gonna feel like I'm missing out on the experience. So I'm
FOMO.
watching this, FOMO, fear of missing out, and I wanted to cover a little bit of that today. But as I was watching the video, then suddenly, like, this person jumped into my vision, and I thought, this looks really like a really good friend of mine. So a friend that I made back in 2019 at one of these Mind Valley events, and we became like sort of almost like brothers from another mother sort of thing. And I know he lives in Denmark, and he's got he actually met someone at Mind Valley 4 years ago, and she's from Colombia, but she moved over and they had a baby and all this and the other, and he hasn't come to events recently because of that. I thought, I can't be him. And then I just kind of started pausing and slowing down the video, and I was like, oh my god, it is him. And I thought, I guess maybe it makes sense because she's from Colombia, and maybe she's gone out with the baby as well. And it just suddenly made me feel like I should have gone, right? Because there's like one of my best mates is there, another best mate of mine from that area is over there, and I had this real feeling of, like, not dread, but just like I've made the wrong decision, and it led me down this thought process, and not a good one. But I wanted to talk about it because I really wanted to talk about this idea of comparison. Because we're always, or at least I can only speak for myself. I find that when I'm on things like social media, I'm inevitably comparing what's happening with me in my life right now with whatever it is I'm seeing on there. And invariably, a lot of the time, it doesn't lead to positive outcomes for me personally, because like we probably know rationally, people are putting their best selves on social media all the time.
Sure.
They're only posting when they're on holiday or they're doing something fun, and you're
very rarely do we post our worst sides, right? Of the really down times, the vulnerable times, the scary times. But we touched on some of this stuff in our first episode, which was very much focused around comparison being the stealer of joy. And I think that last word's quite interesting, only because you mentioned FOMO, and my wife talks a lot about JOMO. Are you familiar with JOMO?
Yeah, the joy of missing out.
Joy of missing out. So there is an opposite to everything, right? And there's the yin and the yang. And I'm barely on social. I know you're on social even less than I am. But I wonder, there's a question for you. I know, so I've kind of cut in a little bit here, but just because the joy and the comparison thing, I think the two things kind of worked out. But interestingly, in our last episode, for those that tuned in, we talked a lot about your beat model, and 2 episodes ago, but also how part of within the beat model for you, one of the things that's often lacking is that social connection, because you are often at home. So I wonder if it's not just the fear of missing out because you've seen this beach-based party that looks great, some old friends, but as a question for you, just listening to what you've just said, are you currently in a part of a moment in your life where maybe you are a bit low on social connection. Is that playing a part in how you're feeling?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, for me, and I think this weekend as well is like the coronation weekend. And actually, to be honest, I didn't watch it on TV. I know that you did something. You had this big spread for the four of you and everything else.
You saw that,
yeah. I did nothing, and I went to the gym like each day for a bit and did some stuff out here. But I just felt like I definitely feeling that, right? And the more I see other people connect, like what I find is that when I'm with people, for example, I use as a crutch like TV and movies, right? You know that I watch lots of movies because I'm always referencing movies. But when I'm with people, I don't feel the need for that because I've got that connection through another means, right? And yesterday, actually, I ended up making, I think, like 6 or 7 phone calls. No one that I reached was available to speak when I went for like an evening walk. And I'm definitely feeling that, right? Because like I said, of my beat model, the area that I fall down the most on is probably 2 areas, probably connection and then being quiet enough in nature. They're 2 areas that I'd say I'd fall down enough on, but probably connection more than ever. And so obviously these events that were going on in Colombia at the moment, they're big connection pieces. Now, it's not all bad. I booked to go away for 3 weeks in Estonia for their event there. So I'll be away for the whole of doing that. And that's kind of keeping me going. But I guess partly, I haven't been away since probably October time. The winters always get me down, all of this sort of stuff.
What's interesting though, just from what you mentioned, I'm just listening to what you mentioned. You made 6 calls and no one answered. And look, this is just more of an observation than a question, really. Isn't it a bit of a damning indictment of where we are at the moment, right? So it used to be that sooner where we connect, you'd walk out to your phone box, right? And you put your, show my age, you put your money in, you'd make a call. And like phones were kind of a privileged thing to have. Then we kind of went through the mobile phone revolution. Everyone's on the phone all the time. The irony is everyone has a mobile phone and no one ever answers anymore because we only now communicate through the written word, through text or through social. And it's not even in full hand. Like I got a message from my daughter that's like IDK. What's IDK? I don't know.
I don't know.
It's like working out
a
secret languages. I'm working out what on earth does that mean? I'm working through it, and it's like there's also that they take. I'm using my daughter as an example, but youngsters now, like they take the passion or the energy out of the messages. Often it's just so shorthand. It's like I'll write a nice long passion message and I'll just get okay at the end or IDK. What? Where's the conversation? But that is a conversation in their world. It's crazy.
And I hate that. I mean, I was watching. They have a tendency on movies these days when people are texting to like put the text up on the screen.
Yeah.
And I think there were adults texting in this movie, but they was doing shorthand like C for C instead of SEE and U for U.
Yeah.
And all of this, and I'm just like, I don't know. Cool. I feel like I'm getting more and more old and old-fashioned because I'm thinking the language has disappeared, right? Even my nieces who sometimes message me on iMessage, they've just figured out things. And my 10-year-old niece has got her own mobile phone now, which I don't approve of anyway, which she knows I don't approve of. But I saw we were at a thing for the coronation on. So I did hang out with my nieces on Saturday, and we went to this pub with my mum, and they bumped into a few friends randomly that they knew there. But she now has got this phone, and it's the first time I've seen her with this phone. And she's in this pub, and there's all these other things going on, and her and her friend are just on this phone, like looking at this phone. Now, this is how they are connecting or communicating with each other.
Yeah.
But I guess I've said it before. I feel like I'm becoming more and more Luddite as I age, and part of that is going back to this, looking at social media stuff and seeing the best self, someone's best self versus your not so good day. Is that it ultimately doesn't usually make me feel good. I don't usually come away from social media feeling enlivened or anything. Now, I'm going to that not necessarily for connection. I just get distracted because, like I said, most of the things I barely go on to these days. So I'm just going on just to kind of check notifications or messages, or if I posted something to see if I need to reply. But I can get caught up, like I did today, a little bit by just checking something out, and then suddenly I thought, I wonder what so and so is doing. So I went onto their profile to look at their profile stuff because I wouldn't have seen anything they've done in the last few years. And it just makes me feel like, I think, have I done enough with what I'm doing?
But there's an irony in all of this, I think. It's like you've got into the social media vortex, right? This rabbit hole of web. And yet it's there to make us, for us to stay connected. And yet when you go on social media, it's often the one thing that makes us feel less connected. And there's an irony in there somewhere. Like in your example then, same for me. Maybe it's because we don't use it as much as others that live on social platforms. But if I go onto Facebook now, you suddenly see how everyone else is connected. And because I'm not on it all the time, I just feel disconnected as a result. I'll put the odd thing out. So you saw the post this week where my wife and my daughter put on like the biggest spread you've ever seen for the King's coronation. There's only 4 in our family. Like, we're still getting through it. It was very impressive. Lots of effort went in. It's great. I put that out there. It was a bit of I thought, a fun and my way of saying like public affirmation of the work they've done, really, for my wife and my daughter, put a lot of effort in. But actually, when you go on there and you see all the other posts and the parties and things people are having, it makes you feel less connected. It's like, does the complete opposite of what it's actually trying to achieve. And half of that is because everyone is trying to show their best selves, showing they're having the best party, having the best time. They don't show that other side of it. And just picking up on your talking of well, we were talking about the text messages and the messages. What I found really interesting, and we've done a lot of talking, and I'm sure we'll continue to, about the power of thought and how that can change our feelings and how we feel about certain situations. Even if I'm getting a message from my daughter that just says, okay, right? When it comes to limiting our level of conversation or communication through the power of just written word, whether it's an email, which is even that's old hat these days, of I am, it's an instant message, it's Instagram, whatever. The recipient can't read the tone. We can only assume the tone. So if I go back to Kevin and Perry Go Large, for those that remember that movie, which, by the way, don't put it on for your teenage daughter thinking it's a really good idea, because I did that recently and completely forgot how graphic, shall we say, that movie is. As hilarious as it was when I grew up, it's definitely dated and probably isn't appropriate for children anymore. But in this instance, like, the word okay could be like okay, or it could be okay, or it could be okay. There's so many different tones, and how you read it is very much dependent on the mood that you're in. So I'm reading it, it's just an okay. I've written this, 6-page text message, or a long message, and I've just got that back in return. Is that okay, Dad? Or is it okay? Or is it okay? And depending on the mood I'm in is how I read that. And that can actually, then you read that single message, then your mind starts playing tricks on you. It starts going, does that mean they're in a bad mood? Have I annoyed them? Or are they really happy? You start making stories up in our heads, all based on 2 letters, okay, right? Because it hasn't been said, it's no longer a phone call, there's no longer that understanding. We make our own assumptions on what that tone is, depending often on the mood we're in when we read it. And I think that's the same when you go onto social. So someone's saying, I'm having a great time. We read it as like, having a great time. It could be a really, I don't know, we're English, right? Sarcastic, we just don't know.
Yeah.
Because we're reading it. It's funny how when we read things, very much the message that we get from it is based on how we're feeling in that moment, or the thoughts that are outside of our zone of consciousness at that moment in time, in terms of when we're reading the message, and it plays into how we're receiving it. And our feelings based on that message are dictated by things that are happening outside. I just think that this interesting. I had this conversation with myself literally when I just got this 2-letter answer in a recent message from my daughter, going, actually, why am I'm putting way too much thought into a simple okay, right? That's just how they communicate now.
There's a phrase that I remember that just jumped into my head from NLP that I remember hearing, which was, if you spot it, you've got it. So if you spot it in someone else, it's usually reflecting back to you something that is showing up in you. And maybe that's the same there, where you're reading into whatever the message is, what is going on for you, rather than what is going on for that other person.
100%. Yeah. I'm probably more articulately put than the way I just did, right? But yeah, for sure.
The other thing, I think I'm going to have to send you a link to this. Now, I'm not sure, our podcast is not R-rated at the moment, so I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say the F word here or not. But have you seen the YouTube clip of Osho? Have you heard of a guy called Osho?
No.
The Osho, I don't know too much about him, although I've got one of his books here. But he's like an Indian spiritual leader kind of dude. And there's a
spoof or genuine?
No, genuine.
Okay.
Genuine. But he's talking about the word. Can I say it? I don't know if we can.
We'll just have to tick the box that says,
Yeah.
the fantasy.
He says the word fuck, right? Fuck can be said in so many different words. It can be like for affection, I fucking love you, right? Or it could be you've messed up, fuck it. Or it could be I don't know, surprise, fuck. You know,
Do the dirty fuck. Go on, Harry. Do that one. Let's hear it.
which
In a dirty way. Go on.
I don't know. I don't know if he did that one. I'm not gonna stretch my. But basically, he goes on for about 15 minutes and does all the different variations. I will send it
all the
to you.
different fucks.
It's hilarious, but it goes to the point that that the tone is lost when you do emails or communication, and we've all had this experience. We've sent a
Sure. You can't read tone. That's
you
the
can't
reality.
read it. So we are getting that, and I think that's a problem. And the thing is, we create the stories in our head about the situation that we're seeing online or whatever. And I'm creating a story in my head at that time. And this goes to what I was also going to talk about, which is how I get myself a little bit out of those moods, and how it's probably one of the most fundamental things I teach to people, which has changed my life. And it's how to manage your mood or your state in any given moment in time, and understanding that there are only 3 things that go into that. And it's not mine originally. I butchered it from Tony Robbins, who stole it from someone else, and who stole it from someone else. But 3 things that go into how you feel. So any moment that you feel happy, you feel sad, you feel depressed, you feel jealous, you feel whatever, there's only 3 things that determine that in any given moment in time. And the first thing, and they all begin with the letter A in my model, because I like to keep it simple, is attention. So that is what you put your focus or your attention on. So this morning, for example, I'd put my focus or my attention on the fact on Facebook, right? And on this post, and that made me feel a certain way. Now, had I put my attention on something else that morning, like, I don't know, reading a nice passage of a book, or, you know, making a nice phone call, or reading an old email from someone that praised me, I would feel differently. But because my focus, my attention was on that created a feeling inside of me. The second of those 3 A's that ties into the first one quite a lot is the word assign. So what meaning or language you assign to what you paid attention to. So for example, the meaning I assigned to that was that I've made the wrong decision, everyone's out there having fun, they're all connecting, I've been here alone by myself for the whole week. You know, and so I should be out there. I should have more disposable income to be able to kind of go and spend thousands on this week-long trip to Colombia and everything else. So that's the meaning I assigned to it. Now, the third A, which also plays into it, is action. So that's the physical actions of your body will determine how you feel at any given moment in time. So, for example, you might have had the experience where you're at a party, and I know we talked about dancing the other week, but you're at a party and you're having a rubbish time, and you know the person you want to see there isn't there, and so you focus on that, or you put your attention on the fact that the person isn't there that you want to see. It means, or the meaning you assign is, it's a rubbish party and a waste of your time. But then your best mate or your daughter or whoever gets you up to dance. Suddenly you're dancing, you're moving your body slightly differently, and your mindset shifts. And then you put attention to the fact that, yeah, you get to spend quality time with your daughter, and it means you're having a good father-daughter bonding time. So for me, those 3 things, when I'm feeling a certain way, I think, right, what am I paying attention to? What is the language or the meaning that I'm assigning to that? And how am I in my body, right? So at that time, I was slumped in my chair on my desk watching. So I ended up just getting up, moving, and I decided to go to the gym and do a class, so that I would have to be thinking about the instructions from the instructor rather than doing the thing. And actually did make me feel much better, right? And I put much peace to it. But I remember, for me, this is the most important lesson that I think I've learned in the last 12 years, is those 3 things. Because whenever I'm feeling a certain way, like if, for example, you work in recruitment, and this would be a great example for people going in for interviews. Let's say you're going to your interview and you've had 12 interviews that week, and you focus and you put your attention on the fact you've had 12 interviews. And then the meaning that you assign to that is that 12 people have rejected you and don't want to give you a job, and you're useless and you can't get a job and you're too old or whatever. And then, you know, you're sat there just waiting to go in. You're going to feel not very confident going into your interview. Whereas you could pay attention to the same thing, the 12 interviews. So you focus on the fact you've had 12 interviews, and you decide a different meaning. And you decide, okay, it means that I've had 12 lots of practice. I'm getting really good at this. By the time the right job comes along, I'm going to be perfect at these interviews, you know, and you get up and you go in there and you're going to be totally different. And this helps you turn up any which way you want when you understand.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like the 3As, I've obviously, like you, have read a lot of time. By the way, for those watching on video, not listening on audio, Harry's just done some brilliant product placement. For those that followed the Beat Model episode, he's lit up a little mug, and I'm pretty sure I can see the Thought Gym logo on your mug. There you go, the Beat Model for everyone to see.
Because also it's a reminder for me. All of my things, I've got visual reminders everywhere.
There you go. I thought I'd mention that anyway. No, what I was going to say is, so you talk about the 3As. And yeah, great example with the 12 interviews, because you also say, well, actually, that means I've got a great CV, 12 people want to see me and so on. But this all links back to 3 things that I would, well, first there's a quote, and I think I might mention it before, but I love it. So I'll say it again. I don't know who it was initially that said it, but it says, those that look outward dream, and that's not a bad thing, but those that look inward awaken, which I think is way more powerful. And everything you're talking about there is looking inward. It's how we change our thoughts, how we challenge our thinking to improve the way that we feel about something, which links very closely to the Sydney Banks 3 principles, which isn't a million miles away from the 3As. So Sydney Banks is about mind being one of those A's, consciousness and thought. So mind is the source of all thoughts and experience. That's what obviously this podcast is a lot about, and the different mind patterns we have. Consciousness is the awareness of the world around us, which allows us to experience those thoughts and feelings. And obviously thought itself, which is the thing that creates our reality, which is what you were talking about changing then in that 12 interview example. You know, if we change the way that we think about a situation, then we can change how we feel about it, and we can change those feelings by the power of our thoughts. So taken together, our experience then isn't determined by our external circumstances, although we often feel like it is, but actually by the quality of our thinking. And if we can get control of our thinking, we have a greater control of our lives. In that instance with the interviews, we get in control of what that process is from a positive mindset, then actually we can gain a much greater control over the actions using your A's that we take next to take advantage of that situation. But I think is really quite powerful, because then that can help you find peace and sensibility in all the things.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. I mean, because I remember, you know, if I want to feel terrible about myself, all I have to do is go online and look up, I don't know, ex-girlfriends, or look up people I went to school with who are multimillionaires right now, and I can feel lousy, right? And this is a big reason why I've gone away from social media, is because I feel like ultimately for me it was a net negative. I mean, I'm still on it and I still go onto it now and then, but I don't tend to really delve into it very much. I tend to post and ghost, as it were. And I know that for me it's going to be a problem and I guess it goes back to, if you spot it, you've got it. When I'm in a place in my life where I feel like there's nothing more I could do, or nothing more I could achieve, and I'm in the sweet spot of everything, then seeing other people, I'm probably, you know, it's fine, whatever. It's not going to make much difference. But when I'm not, I feel like that is not a positive for me. And I think that with the comparison thing, because I have a feeling like I don't want people to walk away thinking that comparisons are actually all bad. Like most things in life, nothing's all bad or all good, because actually we need to compare, right? For example, you're a business owner, you're going to compare yourself to other people in the market, what the market's doing, and so on.
I mean, with comparison comes yin and yang, right? So you have to compare the hard times to understand the good ones and understand the differences. So I agree with you, it's not all bad, but I think it's what we're comparing ourselves against sometimes.
Well, this is the point, is that the challenge, you know, with social media is that the comparisons in the past used to be pretty finite, in that they used to be, you know, the people in your village, the people in your form group or your class or whatever. Now suddenly your comparison is to, you know, people you've never met, people you've got no idea their history, other side of the world, and everything's
I think in the instances you've just said there, I think it gets dangerous when we compare ourselves to things that we cannot control. So anything outside of our control. So if it's the yin and the yang, and you're going through a hard time, you're comparing how you felt then to how you feel now, if you be using the climbing the Everest example, right? That's all positive comparison. Or if you're looking at how you've improved in, I don't know, a 5K time when you were somewhere, you've trained and you've got better, you're comparing yourself then to now, because they're all within your own control. I think when it's within our sphere of control, I think comparison can be okay if it's if we're looking for positive change and we're taking actions to get there. I think where it gets very dangerous is when we start comparing ourselves to things that are outside of our control. And this is particularly prevalent in teenagers and in youngsters, where they look at things on social media, they compare their own selves to something they see, and they won't always know that the intelligence of AI and technology and things that are often fake that you see there anyway. All they tell themselves is, I look different, I feel different, I am different, I'm not, therefore the comparison then can go into a bit of a negative spiral of thinking, well, I'm not good enough, or, you know, I could never be that, or they take extreme measures to try and become that thing without forgetting that what's really important is what's inside, not what's outside. That's why I love that quote of, what we look outside, we dream. So that's a good example of, when we look outward, we dream. We look at the people on social media and we aspire sometimes. When we look inside, we awaken. And that links to the feeling thing, because I think it was Michael Neal who said, every feeling lives in the shadow of a thought. And what I love about that is it links to what you talk about a lot, Harry, which is noticing, being curious and noticing and catching our things. So if we're thinking about something, whether you're in that interview scenario that you gave earlier, if we're able to capture how we're feeling in that moment, I feel really bad, I feel like I'm the 12th interview, I'm rubbish, I'm no good. If we're able to capture that, if we're able to awaken and notice how we're thinking, we'll realize that that feeling does live in the shadow of what we were thinking just 2 minutes ago. That gives us the opportunity to correct it. And if we, I think it's a really, really powerful quote. I'm sure it's Michael Neal, it may not be, but I love his work because he does the inside out theory, which talks a lot about this stuff. But if you think of however you're feeling right now, whoever's listening to this, whatever you're feeling in this exact moment, as I talk to Harry on this show, whether you're listening in a car or traveling, whatever you're feeling at the moment will be living in the shadow of what you were thinking about just a moment ago. So if you can change that thinking, you can change how you feel. And so and I think it's a good noticing technique. That's all. Just it lives in the shadow of a thought. And I think that could be quite powerful, particularly in the comparison moment here, because comparison is when we're looking outward, not inward. Comparing inwardly, I think, is okay in the right place, but outwardly, I think, can be quite dangerous, particularly if you can't control it.
This is I guess the positive here is that I'm very much more aware of those feelings in the moment than I was 15 years ago. And I put a large part of that down to meditation and mindfulness practices, to be honest. But you know, I have this thing called the thought cycle, which again, I don't think is necessarily mine, but thoughts lead to feelings, then lead to action, results, and so on and so on. But it's being able to capture yourself in that moment. So going back to those 3 A's, where I was thinking, again, I'd heard a variation of that for like decades, but it didn't really click until one moment when I was, you know, walking down the street and I felt a certain way, and I thought, hang on a second, I had enough self-awareness to think, what is creating that feeling, right? What are the thoughts? What is the language or meaning I'm assigning to those thoughts? What am I physically doing that is ultimately driving that? And I've heard Tony Robbins talk about this for years and years, and it took like 5 or 6 years of me hearing him say it over and over before I actually got it, because you can hear it and you can know it intellectually, but you're not going to know it like experientially. And it became so liberating for me. It still doesn't mean that I don't feel bad like I did today, right? I felt bad, but then I was like, okay, if I want to dwell on this, then I'm going to go through and I'm going to search for more pictures and blah, 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 and all of this, right? It's not going to help me at all. But something you said before, which I wanted to jump on as well, which was a little bit about the, you know, search outwards, you dream, search inwards, you
awaken.
You awaken. But you were talking a little bit more about this control stuff. Now, I know you've interviewed the late Stephen Covey's son, was it?
It's Stephen Covey. It's just Mark Covey. Yes. He wrote Trust and Inspire, which sold 3 million copies, I think.
Great.
Another thing's an update.
One of the things I think I got from Stephen Covey, although I'm not sure if it originally came from him or not, you know, the circle of influence and the circle of concern. And most of us, like if our listeners think of 2 concentric circles, with the larger circle being the circle of concern and the smaller circle inside of it being the circle of control, we tend to worry about the things that tend to be in our circle of concern rather than our circle of
influence.
And so, like, what we might be concerned about might be the economy, the weather, what people think of us. What, you know, what's going to happen, like, will it rain on our party at the weekend or whatever. Whereas what we've got control over is a lot smaller, in the first instance anyway, which might be, okay, we can't control whether other people like us or not, but what can we control? Well, we can control whether we smile, whether we shake their hand firmly, whether we respond to their emails, whatever. And the more you focus on what you've got control over, you don't tend to get stressed. And I remember there being one time I was on my way to the airport somewhere, and I was starting to get stressed because I was in this car, this probably an Uber car or something like that, and I was running late for the flight, and I was starting to get stressed with that. And I thought to myself, okay, what do I have control over in this situation? So I was like, right, I go on my phone and I look, is there another way, right? Can I get dropped off at a tube station and then take the tube some of the way and get another taxi, right? And that was kind of out of the picture, right? Can I call whoever I need to call to say I may be late or whatever? So I did that. So I did everything that was in my control, and then I just had to let go and say,
Yeah.
That's it, because there's no need to worry. If I get there, I get there. If I don't, I don't. But what I've done is everything within my control, which is plan an alternative route, let people know I'm going to be late, come up with a strategy for if I miss the flight, and so on and so on. And then I'm done.
I mean, if you don't do that though, right, then that's when we start. And I'll tell you something. You've touched upon a point now, which my wife's one of the least favorite things in me, probably. I'll mention that in a minute, because if she listens to this, I'll make her chuckle. But if we don't do what you've just done, if we don't think about it in the way that you've just portrayed, then we start to catastrophize. So, and that's where our thoughts can run away with us. So in that particular example, you're running late for a flight. If you haven't gone through the actions of what's within your sphere of control, if you haven't planned that through and realized you're going to make it or you're not, you're going to do everything you can to get there. And if you don't, you don't, and you've accepted that because you've accepted the circumstances you're in. If you don't accept those circumstances, what we tend to do as human nature is we don't ever look positively. We tend to catastrophize, and I'm going to miss that meeting, which means I'm going to miss that promotion, which means I'm going to get disciplined, or I'm going to miss that deal, or I'm not going to be late and then we start going, I'm going to be late for my kid's party. That means the kids now are going to look at me the same way. I'm going to be, and we take this to the nth degree. And what happens is we lose control of our thoughts. We lose control of that circle of influence and that circle of control that you talked about. And actually, it's so manageable if we just take a step back and go, what is within that sphere of control, which you did, and manage it accordingly. But just to bring it back to the comedic side a little bit, because it brought a smile to my face, you mentioned the flight. So my wife absolutely before meeting me, used to love traveling. Well, she still loves traveling. We used to love the whole experience. Like I think we talked about before, where the holiday for you starts the minute you start, leave the front door, and the experience of getting to the airplane, getting to the airport. You're on holiday, you're out of your house. It's all changed. Slightly different for me and my wife, and for others that they won't enjoy necessarily getting a flight with me. Becky Rendell, if she's listening to this, will know exactly what I mean. I tend to get called to my flight, not for a good reason. I always think I have more time than I do. I faff around. I go to the loo at the least opportune time, just as everyone's going through the gate, and then I realize there's another passport control. And lo and behold, I must be 7, 8, maybe even 9 times now with my wife or with others like Becky or like Dassos and others that listen to this show sometimes. I tend to get called. I'm the last one getting on. I'm the person that gets on the plane. When everyone, you get on and you hear the whole plane go, oh. That's me. Guilty. Sorry. I'm not great at timekeeping anyway. I don't ever miss the flights, but I do let it get a little bit tight, shall we say.
I've had a couple of experiences. One actually that jumps to my mind. I remember years ago, back in 2009, I was heading to Shanghai for New Year's with a really good friend of mine, and we were flying out on Boxing Day. So we'd had Christmas Day and everything, and I was going from my parents' house, usually a 45-minute drive, and my brother-in-law was going to give me a lift there, and I left it. I just thought, yeah, it'd be 45 minutes. So I left it for 45 minutes before I needed to check in. It's still 2 hours before. Some reason there was loads and loads of traffic going on. And as we get closer and closer, we're not going any further and further. And I just see the time slipping away. I get to this point where, and this is the only time I've ever had to do this, but it got so late, I'd missed check-in, I'd missed everything. I was going to miss everything. So I had this massive suitcase. So I ended up in the back seat of the car, opening up the suitcase, putting on as many clothes as I could possibly put on, and then I borrowed his bag because it was a bit better than mine, and stuffed as much in there as possible. And I literally made it with, I think I was second from last going on the flight. I had to jump through everything.
It was probably me behind you, buddy.
Actually, it was another friend of mine. So we were going with my mate and his family friends, and she came on and she was running really late. And she'd even forgotten she didn't have time to even pack her contact lenses or anything. And luckily for her, her contact lens size was the same as mine. So that week we were there, I gave her my contact lenses, which were daily disposables, and I just wore glasses the whole time because she didn't even have glasses on her. And it was actually quite therapeutic, like traveling halfway around the world with nothing but hand luggage. And it meant that I went there and I bought like a new suitcase and a bunch of suits. And
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in less is more, right? And getting rid of the stuff we don't
oh
need.
yeah, I
Being
love that
forced to do
idea.
it, cleansing and in different ways. I'll tell you what it did remind me of. There's a guy called Aj, which Harry will know. So I organise these European cycle tours, and there's a guy called AJ who comes with us. And I think I'm pretty sure it was Italy. We went to one of these cycle trips, and we obviously pack our relatively expensive bikes and pride and joys that we've specced out and packed away delicately in our bike boxes, and we ship them abroad. Were you there when we got to the particular airport and all of our bikes came out in their bike boxes, and Aj was waiting for his, and about 10 minutes later we just saw I think it was saddle came out first, and then a wheel came out. They'd opened it up, but they couldn't get it back in the box, and they just put it out in different parts. He was horrified. Like the bike, little bits of his bike pedals came out, all going around the conveyor in bits because they couldn't put it back together. One of the funniest things I've ever seen. The horror on his face, hoping it was all there. Obviously for a cycle trip, but we leave the next day, so no time for it not to be there. And just coming out with different parts. All of us we're not that supportive, shall we say? We're in absolute stitches, but
no, usually aren't. But I mean, again, in those situations, you have to, it is about having the cognitive awareness to step back and just think, right, what do I do now, right? Because I've lost control over the fact that my bike is in one piece, it's in several pieces. So what am I going to do now, right? I'm going to wait till everything comes out, see what's missing, try and find a bike shop, blah blah blah, etc. etc. But it's really hard.
But it links to the fight, flight, and fight response. Sometimes, if it's particularly disconcerting, and we're talking about biking and traveling. I remember doing Ironman Switzerland back in 2012, and literally the night before the race, for those who are into bikes or not, you have something called a dropout. A dropout links your chain to the rear gears mesh essentially, and it's designed to break so that you don't break your rear cassette. So if it gets bashed, that snaps first. Anyway, lo and behold, just before the race, literally, I think it was the night before, it was about 11 o'clock at night. I was getting my bike ready for the following thing. And I snapped this dropout. And I didn't bring a spare. You don't tend to have those kind of pieces. Well, you should have, I should say, you should have that stuff. I didn't on this field. First Ironman, I wasn't ready. And I went into pure panic mode. I had all these stories going in my mind, all that training, months and months of training. My parents had come out with me to Switzerland. They're all there. And I didn't have a bike to ride. And before a race, any bike that was available had gone. We were going around the expo, my dad in the morning, proper panic mode, adrenaline's flushing through the system, trying to calling all the bike shops, nothing there to take, everything's been rented, pure panic. And it's interesting that probably someone like yourself would have been more practical and gone, well, I'll do something else, or I'll work something out. I was in, so I know it's in me to panic. I know it's also in me to not panic depending on the scenario. But in this particular instance, I was in full 100% panic mode. And in the end, we found a guy who managed to weld together the kit that I had that was broken. And he said, I don't know if it'll hold. It literally held to the end of the race, and in transition, it snapped. It literally snapped again as I put my bike back into transition post-ride and started the run, and it went. Like, you couldn't make that stuff up. And it held for the race. But I remember cycling the entire race. Got a better time than I wanted, but I was just in pure panic the whole time. Is it going to go? Is it going to go? Is it going to go? Sweating as you're cycling. And I was just in pure panic. And if I think back, there are things we can do sometimes, to prevent the panic by planning better. Planning prevents piss poor performance. Now we can use the expletives in this show, right? Which is fair. If I just had a simple, I think they're like 99p or 199 to buy these things. A very simple planning mistake for me. I didn't buy one, and all that energy wasted and emotions, not just me, but everyone around me then were on high alert as well. And it's just, I don't know where I'm going with it really, but it's worth being aware that we have a fight, flight, or fright response. And sometimes we only think of fight and flight. And there's a freeze response in there as well. There is a third reaction we can sometimes have, or we just don't know what to do, and we just get completely frozen by the moment.
I think what jumps to me from that is that when you go into fight, flight, or freeze, and you go into that primal brain of yours, and your cognitive abilities tend to deplete. Yes, you can plan things, but the reality is, and I was talking with my mentee group today about uncertainty and the fact that we were talking about uncertainty in life, and things will be uncertain. Things are always going to be unplanned to some degree. So one of the things that definitely helped me, and I go back to this because I think it has been quite life-changing, is meditation has helped me find the gap between that stimulus and response. So the stimulus is whatever the thing is that's triggering you, the response is that panic or whatever.
Yeah.
Gap is because there's time between one and the other. Most people think that they happen simultaneously, right? You stub your foot and then you scream out in pain. In fact, actually, this happened to me literally yesterday. And had this happened 15 years ago, I would have had a different response. But I'm sitting there after I went for a swim in a sauna after the gym yesterday. And you have to go outside so you don't put your shoes on where the swimming area is. So I'm out there and I'm just drying my feet and I'm looking in my bag at something. And then suddenly I feel this massive, and felt like a big thud anyway, on my little toe. And someone had walked past with their wellies on or something and stamped on my foot, completely oblivious. My initial reaction in my head, I think I went like that. I didn't say anything because and this has happened many times to me before where I've had some sort of knock on the foot or whatever, and I've noticed the pain, or someone spilt hot coffee on me or whatever. I've noticed the pain, I've registered the feeling, and I've delayed it by 2 or 3 seconds before I respond. I'm glad I did, because as I was about to like go off on one, it worked out. It's like a
use one of those fucks in a different way.
It was like a six-year-old kid.
Okay, maybe not.
Completely oblivious, right? A heavy-footed kid, mind you. But I was like, I'm so glad I didn't like yell out like, "What are you doing?" Right? Because she's a little kid. She's oblivious to things, right? But had that been 15 years ago, I wouldn't have had that response. I would have been like some other people I know who something happens like that and they go, oh, whatever.
Well, 2 minutes ago, I'll say 2 minutes ago, to be on this call, 2 minutes before this recording, maybe a little bit, maybe 10 minutes before the recording, I was walking up the stairs and we've got a dog guard up. We've got some dogs here in a minute. We're looking after parents' dogs. We had a dog guard up on the stairs. I was holding a cup of tea, so I had a slightly different reaction to you. But there is a moment here of which I'll get to. So as I was going up, I went to step over this thing and I didn't make it. And I stubbed my toe. And anyone knows when you stub your toe, it really hurts, right? I can use the F word in the show. It really can hurt. I was holding a cup of tea, so not only did it hurt, I then fell forward along down the stairs and spilled the tea all over the bloody, over the steps. So I got really angry. I was like, just trying to get up for this show, ironically for a mindset show, but this thing hit me. I'm in pain with my foot. I've got tea everywhere. I'm trying to get ready for this. I've just moved spaces. So I went out and got a cloth. And I was, a few expletives were said. My daughter's behind me. My wife's further up the stairs. We're walking up together. I went and got a dishcloth and I immediately cleaned up the tea, right? And I'm still going, fucking dogs, whatever, blaming them, not me, for hitting my toe. Of course, it's not my fault. It's the dog's fault. It's not, but it is in my moment. Well, I come out and where we go into the kitchen, it's about 9 foot between the doorway and the sink. And I've got this dishcloth. I come out and I throw the dishcloth and I've absolutely aced it into the middle bit with it. I would say it's about 6 inches by 9 inches space where the dishcloth lives. And I've thrown it. And I've literally aced it straight into that spot, right? And my daughter just goes, "Nice shot, Dad." And I was like, it was pretty good, wasn't it? And instantly I'm out. And it's like, I needed that. Like, I just needed that little comment. I wasn't expecting to get it in. I threw it in pure frustration, not really looking even where it was going. But straight away, it just took me completely out of that moment of the pain had gone by this point. It was the frustration of spinning everything and cleaning it all up and trying to get ready for this and everything else. But it was like, nice shot, Dad. I was like,
breaking your
state. Totally broke my train of thought, totally broke my moment, took me out of it. We had a bit of a giggle and I was like, fair enough. Yeah, it was pretty good.
This might be too much information, but talking of breaking states, which is a big thing that Tony Robbins talks about when getting people out of their state. But I remember with an ex-girlfriend of mine, whenever we used to feel like there was going to be an argument or an escalation of a situation or something was going to get too much, we would break each other's state doing something unusual. Usually it meant us pulling up or down our clothes and exposing ourselves to the other person, because it was something.
I'm glad to hear you stopped doing that in every argument you have now, Harry.
Well, certainly out in public. But, in private, we did that because it would just be like, it would just instantly change your state, and you'd be like, actually, does it matter to talk about all of this stuff? And probably it doesn't in the grand scheme of things. But I guess taking it back also to what we were talking about social media at the beginning, but you were talking about You said something about.
Well, I'll tell you about something I did see on social, which I thought was pretty disconcerting. And it actually were two things I saw on social. I got one on my WhatsApp. One was by WhatsApp that I got, and one was I saw on Facebook. The thing I saw on Facebook was, have you seen the news? The government have just outlawed abortion in the UK. And has anyone seen this? You're looking at me confused because that clearly hasn't happened. I'm aware this has not happened. But someone, a youngster that was connected to someone I'm connected to on Facebook, had put this post out. What was interesting is how I immediately looked at the comments. Well, that's not right. And everyone, rather than fact checking it, had immediately gone in. This is what's wrong with this country. This is. So I think this isn't going to be news to anybody to know that we need to fact check what we see on social. It's not limited just to imagery. We often think about what we see people, and it's often fake, or we don't know what's behind the smile. And interestingly, actually, I was going to challenge you. This brings me somewhere else. I was going to go by thinking with your AANA thing. Well, actually, how often we look and how we appear can relate to how we feel. But actually, that's not always true, particularly in social. There's a lot of smiling and behind the scenes, the individuals creating those poses and those pictures inside, they could be going through all levels of turmoil, trauma, which we talked about last show, big T, little t trauma, but they hide it for social pictures. So even when we're reading a text and it's hard for us to get the tone, it's not even possible sometimes for us to get the tone when we see an image, because often there's a lot hidden behind the image that people don't want to portray, particularly in social. Vulnerability being one. I think we were going to do a show on vulnerability later on, but I think that's something that's also worth mentioning. I think, as you say, people want to show their best lives, but it can be quite dangerous when you are, particularly a youngster, looking at social and you're thinking, oh, their lives are amazing. What they don't know is the level of torment or vulnerability or trauma that individuals of everybody, no matter what your budget is, what your social status, everyone will go through some form of trauma. And then you don't really know what they're really feeling. And are they just portraying that smile? Is it a real, genuine, authentic happiness that they are portraying, or is it not? I think there's sometimes body language doesn't always tell the correct story.
No, I mean, I guess the point with the AA is it's your internal stuff. So it's not the external, what people are seeing on you. So they may.
Internally, you know yourself, right?
Yeah, because you may be putting the smiles on. That's one aspect of the 3 A's, but it's any of those 3 A's will determine your mood or state. So you could be smiling on the outside, but internally you're thinking, oh my God, why am I at another event like this? Or why do I have
the other fact thing I've got, I'll read it out. I don't want to take this into a political angle. This is always about politics. It's just a thing I got on WhatsApp. And I'll tell you my response when it came through. It just said, here's a smashing story. That phone alert, I'm reading here, which cost the taxpayer 6.5 million, was contracted to Fujitsu. They subcontracted it to a company called Infosys. A woman who owns it, here's her husband, and it's a picture of Rishi Sunak, right? Now, that could be quite damning and damaging, and it may or may not be true. All I wrote back was, has this been fact-checked? Because when you receive something like that, the instant reaction is to assume, because it sounds true, it sounds reasonable, and obviously the way it's been written is sensationalist anyway, but we immediately then curry favor with the person with the view of, this is terrible. Now, I don't know, and I'm not here to find out actually in this instance. It's just an example of, maybe that one is true, maybe it's not. But so much of this stuff circulates. And when we read it, we're reading tone into that for a start, but it can be so damaging. And I think this is another example where we're looking outward, not
well, this is
inward. We've got to be really conscious of noticing and fact checking and just having that awareness.
Earlier on, you were talking about how social media was there for connection. We were talking about connection right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say at the time, and it's kind of just come back to me now. At the beginning, maybe social media was there as a way to connect people, but I tell my students all the time, right? If you've got a product that's free, like social media, then you are the product.
Yeah.
And people don't realize is that they are the product, because their eyeballs, their attention, their focus is what's being sold. And so anything that keeps your attention onto their platforms, like this article or whatever, and I think actually Rishi Sunak's wife does have shares in Infosys, but whether Infosys are connected with that alert thing,
no, I don't know. Yeah, exactly.
To be fair, I didn't get that alert because I turned off my emergency alerts. I don't want to be inundated with all this stuff. But yeah, and this is the thing, is that for me, social media is not social anymore. I don't know if it ever was.
Oh, yeah, nice to put. I haven't heard that, but yeah, you're right.
You know,
It's
it
not.
doesn't. At least for me, I mean, there have been benefits, like everything, right? No matter how thin you slice it, there's always two sides to every story, and there are benefits to it. There are detriments to it. At the moment, for me, I think personally, it's a net negative, especially when I go down a comparison rabbit hole. But I can see that there are benefits as well, right? And I've had benefits from it as well. So I guess with everything in the universe, there's nuance.
I mean, we're sharing the podcast on social, right? Because we want to get eyes and ears on it, right? And we want people, hopefully, these shows are creating it, which is one insight or one thought process for someone to take away and can manifest, and then they can utilize it in their lives to help them think about something in a different way and prove their thinking or their feeling or their happiness. Then wonderful. So we use it to our advantage where it suits us as well. I totally respect that social is a good and or a bad thing. It's having the awareness that it can be both. I think
it's always something else I wrote down while you were talking a while back, but I think it's relevant here as well. And it's another equation that I live by. I can't remember if I shared it with you. I think I did. E plus I equals O. I think we shared it in one of the
I think it was the first episode. I think.
Yeah, I think it was the first one. And I keep coming back to, I mean, there's probably maybe a dozen fundamental truths that I over and over and over and over go back to and teach. And this is probably one of them. And event plus response equals outcome, not the event equals the outcome. And it's always our response to the thing that makes the difference, not the thing itself. Because like we say, we can both be at the same party, have different outcomes because one of us is responding to the fact no one's there that we want to hang out with. The other one is responding to the fact that, that person's not there, but you get to spend more time with another friend and get to know them. Yeah. And that leads to the outcome. And I guess I was reflecting a bit on that today as well, is that, okay, I've noticed that I wanted to maybe, I regretted, let's say, not going away, but then did I really regret that? Because, had I been there, that,
I think with social, though, one of the things that can be quite dangerous, I mean, we're talking about the dangers of it here, and I think it's right that we do, because it has such an impact on mental health, such a often negative impacts on mental health, which become mental illness and negativity. I think a lot of that also links to its repetitive nature. So if you jumped onto LinkedIn, to Facebook right now and went for all your friends, you'd find another party that you're not at.
Oh yeah.
And if you did it a week later, there'd be another one. So it's that constant reinforcement of a negative. If you are thinking negatively about something, whether that's weight, whether that's how many friends you've got, whether I don't know, whatever it is, your singing voice. If you're seeing the same thing over and over, and we talked about echo chambers in the past, you sometimes look for the negative, not the positive. So we start going, oh, I wonder if I'm also not invited to that one. So you actually go searching for that thing that's going to make you feel worse. I mean, maybe a bit of a less serious example, but I'm suffering with arachnophobia, right? Now, me and my wife go abroad where there's spiders that I'm going to be scared shitless of. She doesn't go into them looking for them. I go looking for the things. It's like I want to be faced with my fear. No matter where we go, I'm looking under every pillow, behind. And it's like, what are you doing? You hate them. I'm like, I know. I need to make sure there are none there. So what I do is, if I had just taken her approach, I would find and see none. Because I take my approach, I find loads of them. And I know it's a kind of a random example, but I think the same is true in social. If you're feeling a certain way, and we're talking about this links right back to thoughts and your 3As, absolutely. And we talk a lot about thought because it's so prevalent. But if we're thinking a certain way, we tend to use it a certain way. We tend to search for things that reinforce what we think is true. Oh, well, I think that I am this. And to prove that thought, I'm going to go into my little echo chamber of social networking contacts and find the things that prove that to be my version of what is true. Or equally, we could do the other way to dispel the theory. But it's like, anyone who's listened to this, I would say 95% of some people at the moment at some point have played Google Doctor. Right, we get something, we go, oh, I'm going to Google that. We don't look for the positive outcome. We tend to go, I've now got the big C because this is clearly a symptom of this, and this. And then we go into that spiral of looking for other Google things that reinforce those symptoms. And suddenly we've diagnosed ourselves with a crippling illness. We go to the doctors and they go, it's just a rash, it'll clear. And you think, thank God for that. And it's not, I'm not saying don't do that. Go to the doctors if you're unsure. No. But we tend to look for these things. And I just think, there's a word which is a great word. I think it's confabulation, which is believing the stories we tell ourselves. But there's it links to sometimes we are our own worst enemies. So we say it's not just me that thinks it. How often have you heard people say that? It's not just me that thinks it. Everyone thinks it. Well, no, you're looking you're looking for those thoughts. You're looking for that reinforcement, even though it reinforces a negative thing.
If you think it, you'll find it. But I mean, I don't think it's limited to social media, because as you were talking about this, I've had this thought for a long time. This is a bigger conversation about consciousness, the universe, and everything else. But like, I feel like what we seek, we tend to see, right? And what do I mean by that? And you've said in these examples of like social media and everything else, but what jumped into my head was particle physics, believe it or not, right? So I studied physics and astrophysics at university, and a bit of particle physics and everything. And there's, within particle physics, they postulate or they theorize different particles. Now, I think recently, I say recently, within the last 10 years, was it the Higgs boson that made a big splash on the front pages of a lot of newspapers? Probably the collider at CERN discovered the Higgs boson, or the God particle, if you want to call it. And I knew years and years ago that they would find it. Whether or not and actually, interestingly, with particle physics, they don't actually ever discover the particle. They discover the tracks of the particle. So I'll explain what that means in a second. But they found it, and I was like, they're going to find it, because what you look for, you tend to find. And you might say, well, that's rubbish. Like, they're not going to find every particle they postulate, but they tend to have done, right? Neutrinos, they postulated, found all of these things they find. Now, I'm not sure whether they're actually really finding some of these things. For example, like the way they find out the particles is they see this happen so quickly, and it's the aftermath they see. And the way I try to use it as an analogy is like going down the street and seeing tire tracks from like a Porsche tires that have skidded. You're seeing the tires, Martin, you go, oh, I can discern that's a Porsche and not a Ferrari because of the way that the skid is and everything else. But you don't know for sure that it was actually a Porsche. It could have been another car with Porsche tires and a similar weight that did that thing. And that's how they discover particles. So I'm not sometimes convinced on what we're finding, and whether we're just creating what we want to see sometimes.
See what we want to see, right? And that's a common, as you say, there's a cliche and things, and when we hear a cliche, we should listen to it. And I heard that first from you, and it's true. You know, we see what we want to see as a cliche, and that's a good example of it. I think it's also why, and it's for another day.
Yeah, it's not we believe what we see; it's we see what we believe.
That's why there's such, argument about whether the existence of God and certain religions, which is not something I want to talk about necessarily today. But I think just because people, all spiritual beings, and whatever it is, people think, well, because I haven't seen it, or there's no proof, therefore it doesn't exist. There doesn't have to be a binary response to any of those things. That's in my opinion, and that's not giving my religious views out there as to what I follow, what I believe. But I think it's just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not true. We're discovering things all the time, but often, there's a lot of people like to be skeptic, and people like to. I don't even know what power it gives them by trying to dispel something, or someone else's belief, just because something hasn't been seen to be true yet. I don't. For me, it's something like. I mean, it's for another day. It's one of those triggers for me where people want to take away someone's energy for no real benefit. And I get really frustrated by it.
Maybe they have a strong desire to be certain about something. So like I was talking earlier with my mentee group about Tony Robbins's 6 human needs, which you may have come across or not. So there's 6 human needs as he describes them. And the first 2 is the value for certainty or security. And then the second one on the flip side is uncertainty. So we need both uncertainty or surprise or whatever in our life, but we also need certainty. Then the other 2 primary ones are love and connection, and then love/connection, and then significance. So then the top 2 ones are growth and contribution, once the base needs are met. But maybe these people have a desire to be so certain about something, and they've got that's maybe their primary want in life, or their primary need is certainty. So they need to feel certain that they know that there's nothing out there, there's nothing beyond.
And I think that I've no issue with that at all, but I would say just keep that inward. It doesn't have to be.
You don't have to impose it on other people
For
So
sure. There's a really I'm conscious of time for people listening, but I read I can't remember the name of the book, Dale Carnegie, and he's quite a religious guy actually. And I introduced his book to my mum, who's
which one?
It changed her life in quite a significant way. I was trying to find which book it was. I'll Google it in a minute. But there's a story in the particular book. You know, I'm bad with names. I'm surprised I remember his names. I'm terrible with names and celebrities and titles and books.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
But there's a story which I don't know. I just think for people listening, maybe it'll resonate with you, particularly if you've got, I don't know, someone in your life that's like this. But he was at a dinner party, and he's very well versed in the Bible and religious, and he's quite a religious guy anyway, and some of his books go that way. But there's a dinner party taking place. I may not get this exactly right, but it goes something like this. And someone was talking to someone else at this dinner party. The person hosting the dinner party, rather, was telling someone else about a particular story that happened in the Bible. And he said, "Oh, this is what happened, and this is da, 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 da." And the guy went, that doesn't exist in the Bible." Well, no, it does. It's really important, and it's important because of this. And he was telling a different story and using the Bible incident as a reference to support something else. He was telling a group of people and really enjoying and regarding his story. And this guy cut in and went, "No, that's not right. It's not right. That didn't happen in the Bible." And it didn't actually matter whether it did or didn't in the story, but this individual at dinner party was very clear that didn't happen. You're wrong. And the guy, "No, it definitely did. It definitely did. No, it doesn't matter. Let me get these. No, it didn't happen. It didn't happen." Anyway, the guy hosting the party telling the story said, "Well, look, ask Dale. Dale will know. He's well versed in the Bible. He'll know if it's there." And the guy went, "Yeah, great, because it didn't happen. So Dale, tell him it didn't happen." And Dale said, "No, it did. It's in the Bible." And they went, "Really? Really? It's in the Bible. It's there." I went, "Oh, in that case, I'm really sorry." And it continued. Later on, Dale goes back to the guy comes up to Dale and goes, "What? I checked. It wasn't in the Bible. Why did you say it was?" And he said, "Because it wouldn't have served anybody but you to say that it didn't." The guy was telling a story. He was using it as a reference point. He was in his element. He was having a really good time. All you would have done by proving that you were right in that instance was give yourself power and take it away from everybody else in the room. It didn't matter. So I went against you quite deliberately because in that moment, it wasn't about you. I just think that was, I don't know. For me, it really resonated. It's like, well, there are instances where, particularly for me, where I can be quite opinionated. I don't mind saying that. I've got my views where I can jump straight in. I think, shit, why have I just done that? It hasn't helped anybody. It's just an egotistical, shitty thing to do. And you talk about noticing, and I don't mind sharing my own weaknesses and problems here, right? It's a safe environment to do it. It's one of my biggest things. I get frustrated with myself if I jump in too fast and I go, shit, why have I just corrected that? And even if I'm right, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. For me to be right in that moment has just taken the power away from someone else and made them feel small for no reason but for being right.
Yeah,
it just doesn't matter.
That really resonates with me because that story, I love that story. That I think it's in How to Win Friends and Influence People.
It is. It is How to Win. That's exactly.
And I remember reading that story because I was very much like you, and I still am to some degree, where I have this need to be right or want to make sure that people are saying something correctly or whatever. And then, like you, coming to that realization, I think like, is my desire and my need to be right worth it in this effort? And even if you badgered and convinced the other person that you were right, another phrase that I think I heard from probably Brian Tracy or someone like that, it's like, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still, right? So if you badger it down someone's throat, they're still going to think what they think anyway. And I think it's important. And actually one of my this goes on to a separate topic altogether, but relationship advice. But one of the best bits of relationship advice that I can give to people that I used to think of in a relationship is that, would I rather be right or in love? That was my relationship advice, right? Because I remember thinking, like when I was in a relationship and I would see a partner and she'd be like chopping onions, not in the best way that you can possibly chop onions. And I would stop and I literally, the reason I give this example, because I remember where I was when this happened. And then that story or a version of it jumped into my head. And I thought to myself, is it important for me in this moment to like really teach her how to chop onions the right way? And people would probably ask me that, what's the right way of chopping onions? And I said to myself, like, look, I can either be right or in love, right? Is it worth having an argument about this, right? Is my need to be right so important all these times? And actually, I found that a lot recently as well. It's like, you know, you can try and put your will and your ideas onto other people, but A, if they're not ready to hear it, it doesn't matter. But also B, what is it serving? In that moment, in that story that you were recounting, it was the ego of the person interrupting.
100%.
Maybe he came at it from a good place, right? He didn't want the people around the table getting them this idea about the Bible, whatever else. But when you insist upon insisting, then it becomes the ego, because you're like, no, I need to show that I'm right and you're wrong. But actually, is it worth it? And that book actually is quite interesting, because when I read it about 12 years ago, at that time I was going out with someone, and I'd noticed after I read it, and she was the kind of person that got on with lots and lots of people, and everyone really loved her and everything else. And I noticed that everything that she did was echoed in that book. So she always greeted people with a smile. She gave them a compliment. She always asked questions. She never tended to argue. She did all of these sorts of things. And then I mentioned it to her once, and I said, you know what? I've noticed over the last few years, you do a lot of these things. And she goes, oh yeah, my mum gave me that book when I was like 12. And she'd read it and just
I think it's impossible to read that book and not take something away from it, either from someone you know. I think it was probably the book, and I read it probably 5 years ago, that started me on my coaching journey. And one of the things you talk about ego, one of the things they teach you as a coach is you've got to leave ego at the door. It's not about me. And that's something that it's one of the best lessons I've learned. It's actually someone that probably had a lot of ego when I first read that book, and I think I'd like to think I've left a lot of it at the door since then. And we move and we mature and we grow and we change. And the person I was then isn't the person I am now, which is a nice thing. But that book is probably the first book I read that started to change my thinking.
Definitely one of the top ones I recommend for people, and it's worth rereading as well a few times as well. I recognise the time as well. We'll run up on time.
Yeah, I've got. So you got one.
I was going to say I was going to leave this for the listeners to maybe go and watch at some point. And I can't remember if I've asked you this before, but we were talking about social media, and we're talking about how that, like, we're drawn to the negative and all these sorts of things. But I was going to ask you, and maybe suggest to the listeners if they haven't already, have you watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix?
I have, yeah, I've seen it.
That would be one that I would recommend.
Yeah, it's good.
Not watched it, to watch it, just to understand a little bit more about
how people en masse can be convinced to think a certain way.
Yeah, it's
quite scary.
Disturbing. Yeah, quite disturbing. Yeah.
I was going to mention before we sign off, then there was a story, and I just found it because I've got it in my coaching archives, and it's it was written by someone called Mavis Karn, Karn. So I want to look it up. It's called The Secret. But she was a head teacher, and she wrote a story for. I'll say no, it's not a story. It's a letter. She wrote a letter to her kids and former kids. And it says that I've got a secret. I'll just read a bit of it. It goes on longer than this, but I've picked a little excerpt just to finish off today's show, really, because I didn't know it was going to be there. I've just literally found it in my files. And it says, I have a secret to tell you. Nobody meant to keep it from you. It's one of those things that's so obvious that people couldn't see it, like looking all over for the key that you have in your hand. And it goes on, but I'll read this little bit for you here. It says, the only thing that can keep you from enjoying all that you already are is a thought. One thought, your thought, not someone else's thought, your thought. Whatever thought you are thinking at the moment, that feels more important to think than feeling grateful, alive, content, joyful, optimistic, loving, and at peace. That's the only thing that's between you and happiness. And it goes on. If people want to find it, it's called The Secret by Mavis Karn. But it's I think that's really powerful. We talked a lot about thought. You talk a lot about gratitude and the gratitude diaries and how that's really one of the key things you'd recommend people start to do. And I talked a little bit about the couple, to get the name, Simon I think that mentioned it. It's impossible to feel unhappy and grateful at the same time. But I think all of this is kind of tied in with thinking. And when we look at social, which whether this episode started with, right?
Directing where your thoughts are going. That's the thing. That's the problem.
Every feeling lives in the shadow of a thought. So just be very conscious, that consciousness of the way that you're thinking about something that you see, something that you read, and be aware that if you change the way you think about what you're looking at, what you're reading, what you're perceiving, you can change the way you feel about it. And you don't have to, or social doesn't have to be a negative. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be something that makes you feel negative or bad or sad or FOMO. Or take the advice that my wife's followed, hasn't been on social for years now, which is JOMO, which is the joy of missing out, which takes away that comparison that steals joy in the first place. I haven't quite followed the JOMO revolution yet. There's a little bit of me that still suffers with that FOMO of just don't want to miss that one thing.
No,
But,
my parting quote for everyone, as you were talking about that, from either Wayne Dyer or Zig Ziglar, depending on who you look at it, change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change.
Very nice. There you go. Perfect place to almost finish the show. However, I need to mention, I'm in my new space today. For those on video, I'm going to lift this up. I have my first standing desk.
So you've been standing, and I've been sitting.
I have first ever show I've done standing up, and it's different. You know,
I feel bad. I'm going to stand now. There we go. I'm
starting. Lucky.
It does feel different, doesn't it?
Shadow boxing, shadow box as we podcast. Yeah.
And I apologize to people watching on video for this weird light that's coming off. It's my salt lamp that is giving me this red glow, because I don't like lights in the evening, and the fact I'm not wearing glasses right now, like, to protect my eyes, is a thing in itself.
People will get to know you well, Harry, and your many gadgets and weird things. I say weird unfairly, but the things that you do are very different to most in an evening time with no blue emitting light whatsoever. And usually you wear red sunglasses and all sorts, right? So
yeah, and I'm going to go and put them on now. I just didn't put them on for this show because it was still light when we started. But that's why I've got this weird glow coming. If you're watching it on video,
it's a radiant glow, Harry. It's a radiant.
And if you're not watching it on video, you can always go to my YouTube channel, and they'll probably be up there. The Thought Gym on YouTube. So. And
we should add, I'm going to mention this just before we go, last bit is we're probably going to move the show to fortnightly episodes rather than weekly, just due to time commitments. Hopefully that's all right with everyone. The other shows I've got work really well on the fortnightly process, so that's the same. Also, I'm in America next week, so we can't record. So if you do miss an episode, or you think you've missed an episode rather, you haven't, we're just going to be moving it to fortnightly from episode 8, I think, which is this one. So yeah, that leaves us all to say, Harry, thank you. I'm in the States next week, buddy. I don't know if we can connect while I'm away.
Where are you headed to?
Going to Denver for the American Payroll Congress. So there you go. I'm not going to let my thoughts get away with me too much because it'll change the way I'm feeling.
Then Denver, are you going to have time? You should head up to Boulder. Boulder's like half an hour away from Denver, isn't it? And I've always wanted
it should be really good. There's loads of people to connect with out there. It'll be
we like Boulder. Lots of outdoor activities.
Yeah, I think I love it. It's just a chance to get away and meet some people that I connect with a lot on LinkedIn social platforms.
Are you going solo?
No, I'm going with 2 guys I work with. So yeah, it should be a lot of fun.
Oh, nice, good. All right, well, have a good time. I'm due a holiday to the States at some point soon. I think Austin might be on the cards because one of my best mates has moved there. So Austin, Texas, apparently is a good place to go.
Place to be. Very nice. All right, buddy. Listen, we'll catch up probably stateside in a week or so. And thanks everyone for listening. Keep sharing the show with all your friends, colleagues. We'll keep our listeners growing. That'd be great. And we'll catch up with you all soon.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Mate. Take care.